Gender normativity is a thing, sadly. I'm going to talk about that today. Essentially, the definition of gender normativity or gender normative is basically believing that gender roles that, have been, established societally are, the correct way that people should behave. Specifically, men and women. You could probably already tell that that's problematic, but I'm going to talk about it. Basically, it's kind of like the sort of unofficial rules that people of certain gender are supposed to act a certain way. It's essentially you know enforcing those rules, whether or not you're doing it consciously. A lot of people do it without thinking about it. A lot of people do it on purpose. But so the problem with that is, first of all, it erases non-binary identities. Gender normativity doesn't represent people of genders that are not men or women. So that's already a problem, because we all know that there are more than two genders. And it's kind of in the same way that, beauty norms in society, gender norms can set, impossible standards. For example, this is part of the reason it's a problem for trans people, who may identify as men or women. But for, trans men and trans women, for example, a lot of the time you'd feel pressure to conform to the ideas of the gender that you identify as, even if it doesn't feel comfortable to you. Either that, or it can make it harder for people to come out as trans in the first place if they feel like, well, I can't be this because I don't do this, or I don't like this. I can't be a woman because I don't like dresses. That's silly. Or, I can't be a boy because I like dresses. That's also silly. You definitely can, but unfortunately, a lot of society tells you that you can't. So here's some examples. Women should be caretakers, men should be breadwinners. That's one. Boys shouldn't play with dolls, girls shouldn't play with, trucks and stuff, although that one tends to be more reinforced with boys than with girls, unfortunately. Men should be strong, women should be submissive, all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to give you a real-life example, like they always told me to when I was student teaching. I knit a lot. I'm knitting presents for everybody this year for December holidays, as I like to refer to them. Generally, knitting is thought of as something that women do, which is ridiculous because it's fun. But I take my knitting to school with me, and I knit in the hallway before class. And sometimes people look at me like I have three heads. And one of my classmates said, "Oh, I've never seen a guy knitting before." And she didn't say it like it was a bad thing. She said it like it was a good thing, which was awesome. I feel like maybe a lot of guys who would like to do something like that, like to do something that's traditionally thought of as for women, don't do it just because of that reason. So even though, a lot of the time people sort of enforce these gender norms on purpose, sometimes they don't do it on sometimes it's not on purpose. For example, a lot of the language that people use just on a day-to-day basis is really sort of enforcing gender normative roles. For example, if you say to someone man up, that's saying that men that's sort of enforcing that men should be the tough ones. If you're gonna man up, you need to be tougher like a man. A lot of insults, pejorative insults used for men refer to them as women, thus saying that women are weak, but also that women are bad, which also brings into the sexism part of this whole thing, in that gender norms are super sexist anyway, but basically they're not good for anybody, cis people or trans people or anyone. What I try to do is point this out to people, be like, hey, if you hear somebody say something, be like, that's not cool, stuff like that. Unfortunately, it's not something that's just gonna go away overnight, but it's definitely something that more people can and should be aware of. So that's always a good goal.